Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast, in which a long-time Agatha Christie collector and her Christie novice husband discuss the works of the Queen of Crime in publication order. In this episode, we take a look at The Mystery of the Blue Train.
Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast. We are your hosts.
Gillian Porter, a long-time Agatha Christie reader and collector.
And her husband, Alan Porter, who after almost 40 years of sharing a house with Agatha Christie books, has decided he should read them.
We'll be tackling the books in UK publication order as detailed on the official Agatha Christie website and sharing our thoughts on each from the viewpoint of someone familiar with them
and someone reading them for the first time.
In this episode, we'll be taking a look at The Mystery of the Blue Train, which was first published in 1928. But before we do that, what was going on in the world, Alan?
Well, thank you. As we say, usually what we like to do is place the book into the context of what was happening in the UK and the world at large at the time. So what was going on in 1928? Around the world, unfortunately, armed conflict started between the Imperial Japanese Army and the Chinese Southern Army in Jinan. I hope I pronounced that right, correctly, in the Jinan province of China, which of course would go on for many, many years. And another sad note, the airship Italia crashed at the North Pole while on an expedition to fly over the North Pole, as you do, apparently. And a rescue expedition left for the pole a few days afterwards. Unfortunately, by the end of the rescue operation, 17 people had died, including many of the rescuers, and they found just 8 survivors. I didn't have it in the note here, but I read later on they were rescued by one of the first planes to land in the North Pole for the rescue attempt, and an icebreaker ship. And talking of flying, Australian aviator Charles Kingsford Smith and his crew completed the first flight across the Pacific from the mainland United States to Australia. It's interesting, you hear all about the Atlantic crossings, people being famous, Lindbergh and Earhart and all that sort of stuff, but very rarely do I hear about the first Pacific crossing. So. And on a more jaunty, fun note, the animated short, talking of planes, the animated short Plane Crazy was released by Disney Studios in Los Angeles. And the significance was that this was the first appearance of both Mickey and Minnie Mouse. You know, we often say that something is the best invention since sliced bread. Well, before 1928, they couldn't say that, because it was in 1928 that the first machine-sliced and machine-wrapped loaf of bread was sold in Chillicothe, Missouri. And in the UK, John Logie Baird broadcast a transatlantic television signal from London to Hartsdale, New York. But also, amazingly, in 1928, same year, he demonstrated the world's first colour television transmission. And it took another 60 years before it became regular colour TV. So interesting. I wonder why it took that long. In 1928, the publication of the original Oxford English Dictionary was completed after 70 years of work with the issue of the last section. Read a couple of very good books about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary, and unfortunately the name of it just completely escapes me at the moment.
I was trying to remember too, so don't worry.
And in the UK Parliament, the passage of the Representation of the People Act in the United Kingdom lowered the voting age for women from 30 to 21, giving them equal suffrage with men who were already allowed to vote at the age of 21. In London, microbiologist Alexandra Fleming at St Mary's Hospital accidentally discovered the antibiotic which would later be called penicillin. And if I remember right, when we walked by that hospital at some point, there's a blue plaque like halfway up the wall underneath the window where the mold came in, isn't there, or something like that?
Yeah, I remember that being there.
But it's way up on the building. You don't really notice it walking by, but yeah.
Only if you're looking for it.
Anyway, with all that, that's what was happening in the world at large and in the UK. Jill, what was going on with Agatha's personal life in 1928?
Well, after her divorce was final, she planned to travel to the West Indies on her first solo trip. But after meeting Commander and Mrs. Howe at a dinner party, they talked about how fascinating Baghdad had been and recommended she go to I don't know how you pronounce that, I'm going to say. So she changed her plans. So she traveled on the Orient Express to Istanbul and Baghdad, which she'd always wanted to go on the Orient Express. So there's a good experience for her. She made the journey to Ur and became friends with archaeologist Leonard Woolley and his wife Catherine, who were working the site there. And the only reason she was allowed to visit was because Catherine Woolley was a huge fan of her books. While she was out that way, she met a Colonel Dwyer who had served with her brother Monty. So she enjoyed reminiscing with him about her brother. She came back in time to spend Christmas with Rosalind at Abney Hall, which was her sister's home, so she was married. So they spent a fun Christmas together. And then Rosalind and Agatha headed to London after Christmas to go to a show with some of Rosalind's friends, but one of her friends got measles, which Rosalind ended up catching. So they headed back home. And while Rosalind was suffering from measles, Agatha was suffering from complications after having a vaccination, which she'd had in her leg to avoid marks on her arm, which would ruin the look of her evening dress.
So she paid a price for her vanity there, didn't she?
She did. I don't know if her leg was scarred. I couldn't find anything about that, but I did read about it, and apparently this was common practice in the day to have those vaccinations in your legs so you didn't have all those. Because if you remember, some of the vaccinations we had as kids left quite a big mark.
Yeah, I remember people having that. I think it was polio vaccination would be like a little crater in their arm. It would be quite fun to see that. Yeah.
So, but this was apparently quite common in those days.
Yeah. Okay.
So that you wouldn't ruin the look of your evening dress, which is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So basically, the reason it did what it did is because she drove back home. And so she drove all that way. And the doctor said the reason the leg was so bad is because it was stuck in that one position while she was driving. Apparently, it swelled up and was pretty nasty.
I mean, we'd just been to Abney Hall not long ago. And I mean, we used to, when I lived in Manchester, we had friends in Surrey, and we'd do that drive, wouldn't we, from Manchester to Surrey. That's quite a long drive.
Yeah.
And we did it when there's motorways and A roads.
Better roads, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, that would be a really long drive. With that, we should actually get talking about the book. Of course, we'll start with our regular spoiler warning that during our discussions, we will be diving into plot and character details, as well as talking about the whodunit and why. And with that said, let's dive into the mystery of the Blue Train.
Aboard the luxurious blue train running from London to the Riviera, pampered millionaire's daughter, Ruth Kettering, is murdered and her expensive jewels stolen. But Poirot is at hand to solve the case. What were your thoughts on the plot, Alan?
Well, I was a bit worried about this one because you had mentioned that Agatha Christie herself didn't like this book, and it's generally not held in high regard. So I approached this with a little trepidation as to what I was going to read. I don't know why, because I actually really enjoyed it. I don't know why people don't like it, or she didn't like it. It had me hooked early on, and if you'll pardon the pun, I was along for the ride all the way through. I thought it was a fun, quick read. I did actually get through this one pretty quickly. It is one that I didn't just leave on the nightstand like some of the others. I would actually pick it up during the day or read it over breakfast, so it hooked me that way. And I thought it was an intriguing mystery. What I did like was the fact that it was quite a while before Poirot appeared, and his sort of involvement grew organically from the plot. It wasn't like, here's Poirot from page 1, and we're going to tell a story about what happened to Poirot. It's like, here's a mystery which Poirot happens to be pulled into, and then his involvement grows as the mystery deepens. So I like that. I like that approach. And of course, you mentioned the Orient Express earlier. It's difficult to read it and not be aware that she's going to do a much better murder on a train plot later on. Again, I could feel her sort of stretching her legs a bit on this one and trying out some new things and a new approach to telling a Poirot story. I thought it was a good plot, and I really enjoyed it. What about you?
I had memories of a different beginning, but then I was guessing that I was remembering the adaptation, and then, no, I'm not. I don't know where I got the idea from. So that's just my brain, obviously, working weirdly. I thought it was a light, fun, quick read, not hard to follow at all. The story flowed really well, and the clues were dotted about with a pretty subtle hand, I thought. Christie had been quoted as saying that she thought less of anyone who liked the books. Well, I guess you can add me to that list, as I enjoyed this one. The pace was great, and the mystery, even though I knew who it was, I thought the mystery was intriguing. Like you, I liked the way Poirot was brought into this one a bit more naturally, and you saw him doing things as well. It wasn't just all about him knowing stuff or finding things. You know, he did some detecting, and I really liked that.
I guess we won't be on Agatha Christie's Christmas list then.
No, I guess not. All right, moving on to the setting. It's interesting that St. Mary Mead gets a mention in a Poirot story, but I assume that she used the name and then it came to her when she was writing the first Miss Marple novel of why not use that name, as it's already in the world that Poirot was inhabiting at this point. I felt the village seemed very real from the few sentences it's given, maybe because I grew up in England and the description of winters was so accurate. I didn't feel the train really got its due here, as that was more about the movements of various people rather than the train. It didn't really, to me, come across as a character. But the descriptions of the Riviera, where I have never been, were really brought to life, and they made me want to sit on a terrace above the ocean with the smell of mimosas around me, have a cocktail or a coffee or something. It really, I felt, brought that alive. What did you think, Alan?
Well, it sounds like we need to do a research trip to the French Riviera then.
Oh, yes, please.
Okay, because I haven't been either. I have been to the south of France like you have, but not actually down to the Riviera. Yeah, like you said, I felt the train itself took a back seat to the goings-on among the rich and titled in both London and under the Riviera. I would have liked more description of the train and the carriages and the, I assume, sort of high-level furnishings and, you know, get some sense of that, which you get a lot more, obviously, in the Orient Express book. I didn't really get a feel for what the blue train was, other than the fact it was a train the rich people used to get from London to the Riviera, and that you avoided some passport control at some point, which I still couldn't quite figure out how that worked either. I would have liked a bit more about the train and its goings on, but you know, the description itself was fine, and the mechanics of the journey were fine, were well done. I didn't get lost, but I felt they could have done with more. As you said, the Riviera stuff, I got a real sense of the place and why it's an attractive part of the world for people with money to spend their time there. I thought it was interesting. He kept jumping between Nice and Monte Carlo, which is quite natural because, you know, they are next to each other. I liked the description of the little car chase as well. I thought that was quite well done. The guy dropping something off at the post office to hide it. And as you said, it was fun to see the St. Mary Mead get name checked so often as the English village. It's interesting seeing the foundations of Miss Marple with the stuff in the sister in Roger Ackroyd being very much a prototype Miss Marple. I thought maybe even Catherine Grey was a little piece of the Miss Marple character. And then St. Mary Mead, it's like seeing these little foundational pieces come together that obviously she eventually pulls together in the Miss Marple series, I assume. So it's fun to see that. So I just mentioned Catherine Grey, so, you know, let's move on to talking about the characters. My moaning about the number of characters in the books has become something of a running joke between us. And I did groan when I picked up the edition that we were reading of this book and opened the cover. And the first thing I saw was a page that was like cast of characters. I was like, oh, great. There's going to be, you know, if they feel they need to put a cast of characters at the beginning of the book, there's going to be a lot of them and they're going to be complex. By the way, there was 11 of them I did count. But the big difference here was that I didn't really need that. They were fully developed. I could have done with that cast of characters page in The Secret of Chimneys. Here, I didn't need it because I felt they were all, as I said, well-rounded, well-described. And the thing is, everybody had a role to play. They felt like real people rather than just a name that flew by, which has been one of my complaints in some of the other books. So here, I loved pretty much all the characters and understood them, understood what they were doing, what their motivation was, what role they had to play, their relationships to each other. So well done on the characters on this one. What about you? I know you, Jill, you don't have the same issue with the number of characters in a book that I do.
No, I don't. And I did wonder if my issue with that is because I've grown up reading these books, but also a lot of the books I read have a lot of characters in them. And I really don't understand your issue with that at all, because if you've got a book that's only got like 3, 4, 5 characters in it, it's going to get a little bit one note, I would have thought. So I think this is a discussion we're going to be having for a while, don't you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think I've dug a hole for myself here with that comment earlier on.
I think so. I was thinking June.
I was going to say, as somebody who loves big fantasy epic books, and I'm, yeah, to your point, yeah, I'm looking at this shelf there with all 22 volumes of the Dune books.
Anyway, in this book, I thought they were all very well drawn. Again, even with minimal descriptions, you got a good feel for everyone. Even characters that weren't in it very long, like Miss Viner. I mean, in just her letters, in her letter, maybe I don't know if it was one or two letters, I can't remember now, to Catherine Gray, she really came alive. It's such a skill to have, to be able to make a character come alive like that in just a letter. You know, I knew who she was. But my absolute favorite description is of Goby. I love him. I love the way he's described as addressing all the different pieces of furniture in the room rather than making eye contact, and the rare moment he makes eye contact when he's shocked by something. I just loved the idea of a guy who finds out secrets, but he doesn't like making eye contact with people. And talking about the cast of characters, I don't ever read them. If I can't work out who the people are from the writing in a book, then I'm probably not going to finish it. I know I'm going to finish these because we're doing it for the podcast, but I tend to find them confusing because you read that whole list at the beginning, and then I find for me, it jumbles the characters rather than clears them up. And then I go into the book feeling confused. So I did try it a couple of times. And if a book has a cast of characters, I just flip on by because I just want to go in, and if you haven't written a character, whoever you are, in such a way that you get who they are from the descriptions, then a cast of characters isn't going to help me.
That's interesting because I know I've had this running gag about the number of characters, and the fact there was a cast of characters list in this book sort of didn't give me a start when I opened it, but I didn't read it. I mean, I did a very quick count to see how many there were because of the podcast, because of the ongoing conversations we've had. But no, even any book that I open that has a cast of characters in it at the beginning, I don't read that. I flick over it just like you do. You're right. If you can't pick it up from the story itself, then it's not as well written as it should be. You should be able to pick it up from the things. What I don't like is where characters are introduced and they don't really drive the plot anyway, or you don't really get to know them, but they become just a name. And when it becomes just a sea of names, then I don't like that. If there's going to be a lot of characters, I like it to be like this one, where they actually all have a role to play and I get to know them, even if it's a small role, but I get to know something about each of them through the story. So I agree with you 100%. If there is a cast of characters at the beginning of the book, I don't read it.
Good to know we agree on something. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's get to the denouement. I found this very muted and disappointing. Even though I know who done it, it was just kind of flat and meh. Obviously not where he's doing the room full of people and picking people apart or talking about motives and that. It was like, okay. How about you, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, actually at the very end, it was sort of very matter of fact of him just basically being back in London and talking to Catherine and saying, hey, did you work it out? Well, here's the solution, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it felt a bit anticlimactic, but I did give myself a pat on the head because I was half right. I figured out early on that I thought that the departing maid, Ada Mason, had been involved when she mysteriously left the train and ended up in Paris, or did she actually go to Paris? There was something about her that triggered early on. It's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure she's involved. But then having the millionaire's secretary, Major Knighton, be the murderer, that was a surprise for me. But I wasn't keen on this whole secret identity thing again, where he's, also the mysterious, renowned jewel thief known as the Marquis, which was introduced fairly late into the novel. There was no mystery built around this character. It was just like thrown in the third act. So I didn't like that aspect of it.
Can I interrupt you there? He is mentioned early on.
What, the Marquis?
Yeah.
Is he?
I'm pretty convinced he was mentioned in the first act.
Okay. Maybe I didn't remember that then. It was only towards the end, but okay.
I think so.
All right. I'll believe you. So, all the good Christies so far, I've been going back and forth in my head as to who I thought were the other suspect. At one point thinking it was the dancer, or even somehow it was Lennox Tamplin, the socialite's daughter. I thought they may have had hands in things. So I'll give myself 50% on this one. I got the maid, but not the killer. Not the major, should I say. So I thought the mystery was reasonably well done. But like you said, I think the actual end reveal, the way that was done, was a bit anticlimactic.
We should we should have started earlier, done like a count of how many you get right.
Oh, I think this is, I think I'm on half a point. which is why I was so pleased with myself.
Okay, I'll give you that one then.
All right. Talking of the way things were done, let's talk about the writing generally. As we said earlier, I thought this was a light, quick read. It was a good mystery. I thought the character development was well handled. We talked about this. I mentioned this earlier on as well, but I really did like the way this was done as a Poirot story, the way it was told like this, with him being drawn into the story rather than through some third-person narration, be it Hastings or somebody else telling the story. It felt more natural and more Christie. She's moving away from that Holmes-Watson dynamic to Poirot as his own character in his own stories, and his actions being driven by the story rather than somebody else's description of his reactions. So I'm not saying that very well, but I much preferred it this way. I'll shut up because I'm starting to ramble because I'm trying to think what it is I want to say, and I think I've said it several times. So I'll shut up and pass it back to you, Jill.
But I get what you mean. I think I prefer it this way too. The natural, him happening to be on the train, being pulled into the story, I think is a much better way to go. I thought it was another well-written addition to the Poirot canon. Even when she's not at her best, which is what she said, she can write. I love when they have the humor too, because even in your darkest moments, people can find humor in things. And I think adding it to stories, novels, whatever you read, to me, it makes the story feel more natural because we all have a weird sense of humor. Some people have a very dark one. It comes out at moments. And I like the fact that there was humor in this. The one thing we did talk about separately, which neither of us have touched on here, is the two things. There was always that comment about Catherine Grey having fine grey eyes. I feel like that was a twist on Darcy's comment of Elizabeth Bennet's eyes from Pride and Prejudice, maybe. And then there's also the comment that she makes a lot about Poirot's eyes turning green when he's getting close to the end, or he hits a clue or whatever that clears things up for him. And you and I discussed this. I don't look into people's eyes that closely to see what color they are. No, but I'm also not aware of anybody whose eyes change color. And then they have somebody like David Suchet play the part, who obviously wears contacts and his eyes aren't green anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you on the not looking at see what color people's eyes are. I don't get it in literature at all, in books at all, where they're like, oh, immediately attracted to their blue eyes or their green eyes or whatever. I couldn't tell you. I mean, I know your eyes are blue and our kids' eyes are blue, but we get physically quite close to each other. I couldn't tell you what the color of my mother's eyes were, or, when I meet somebody, I'm not staring into their eyes to see what color their eyes are. So, yeah, I don't get it that, particularly here, like there's the one point where Kettering bumps into Catherine Grey for the first time in the hallway at the Savoy, and it's immediately drawn to her grey eyes. And I'm like, you literally just brushed past this woman. How the heck do you know what color her eyes are? I just don't get that in literature at all, this obsession with green. There was that book you were reading where somebody kept going on about some woman's pistachio eyes. And it just became a bit of a running joke. But again, I don't understand that because it's not something physically I ever notice. Maybe I'm missing something by not noticing the color of people's eyes when they're casual acquaintances or I just have a conversation with them. As we're sort of going off the book and into book-related things, if you've got other things that you want to talk about, I know there's one thing I want to talk about. But
only that in 1966, Agatha Christie stated, "Easily the worst book I ever wrote was The Mystery of the Blue Train. I hate it." I was wondering about this, and it made me think that she couldn't see past what was happening at the time. There are certain maybe days or trips or movies that you associate with something bad that's happened in your life, and it's always going to be associated with that. So you don't like those things. And I'm wondering if, because she wrote this book during her divorce at one of the lowest points in her life, she couldn't see the book anymore. It didn't matter. It could have been the best book she ever wrote. She was always going to hate it because of what memories it brought up while she was thinking about it, as opposed to whether the book's actually any good or not. Does that make sense?
That's actually really good. I wasn't going to ask you if she'd actually ever explained why she hated it, but that's very good because she does actually, the book does start with a lot of discussion around divorce. And you and I talked about it when I was first reading it, that she was very much projecting, I think, what was going on in her life and put it into that book. So maybe just the very fact that divorce is a through line of the book, of the discussion of the divorce, and a pretty nasty divorce. That I think you're probably on a point there. It doesn't matter how well she wrote it or how good the book is. For her, whenever it's mentioned, it's always going to be a reminder of everything that was going on in her life during that time.
Yay, me.
Yeah, good point.
And what would you like to discuss?
Mine is a lot less prosaic and insightful than yours, and more geeky. I loved it. There's a scene in here where I think it's the Count sort of wannabe playboy thing. When he knows the police are going to come search his house, he takes something I can't do anymore, pulls the hair from out of his head, and then licks it and sticks it across a drawer. When he comes back, if the hair's missing, he knows that drawer's been opened, therefore that the room's been searched. I had a total geek out of that moment because obviously on other podcasts we mentioned big Bond connections we have. When I first saw Sean Connery do that with his closet door in Dr. No in his hotel room, I thought that was one of the coolest bits of spycraft I'd ever seen, and was totally geeked out by it. I had no idea that Agatha Christie had used it 30 years earlier, which made me wonder if the screenwriters of Dr. No had actually read The Blue Train and gone, that's an idea, we'll have James Bond do that. Because I don't think it's in any of the Flemings. I'm just trying to wreck my brain. I don't think it's a trick that Fleming uses. I think it's just in the movie. So it just made me wonder if the screenwriters of Dr. No had actually read the Mystery of the Blue Train. Or
it's been in some other spy book somewhere that we've never read.
Yeah, maybe. It may be common practice, but I always think it's one of the coolest bits of spycraft from a Bond movies. And of course, as a kid growing up, do that and stick it on the bedroom door so if your parents have been in and checked your bedroom or stuff. Not apparently, so people told me they did. I never did that, of course. So
of course you didn't.
No. So nice little Bond geek out moment for me in the middle of a Christie book, so I like that. Okay, before we move on to discussing the adaptations, we want to take a quick break to tell you about our new Patreon account, where you can now get early access to our podcasts, as well as our new Patreon-exclusive Agatha-adjacent podcast series. I actually just mentioned earlier on that we'd been to Abney Hall. We do have a episode discussing our visits to Greenway, Abney Hall, and the Old Swan Hotel when we were in the UK. And our Patreon subscribers will also get the opportunity to submit questions for our bonus Q&A episodes. It's quick and easy to join our growing Patreon community, starting at the Greenway level for just $5 a month. So think about it, all that extra Agatha goodness just for the price of a cup of coffee. And you can check it out with a free 7-day trial or subscribe at patreon.com/Chronological Christie. And we hope you can join us there, and thanks for your support.
Okay, now we'll move on to the adaptations. This one has a graphic novel, which we possess, so that's quite good. And the graphic novel was published in French in 2005, entitled Le Train Bleu, from Emmanuel Proust Editions. It was The Mystery of the Blue Train was released by HarperCollins in December 2007 and was adapted and illustrated by Mark Pissick. This was translated from the edition first published in France. So I'm going to go first here. I thought the storytelling was clear and straightforward from the book, but I really didn't like the artwork at all. Those long, high foreheads and the lumpy faces of the men. You could tell people apart, but man, they were all ugly. There were certain people in this that were meant to be beautiful or handsome, and they were all ugly with these high foreheads and lumpy faces. I thought that was a bad choice of artwork. I don't know if that's the way he draws everything else, but I did not like it. There was a big slip up too with the value of the rubies. At the beginning, Van Alden tells Major Knighton that they were worth like £400 to £500. Later in the book, they were worth up to £400,000. So obviously wasn't edited very well either. And I felt like some of the text didn't necessarily seem to go with the art it was attached to. And I thought it took an awful long time for Poirot's name to be mentioned. And why would Catherine Gray be happy to work with some random dude she's never met before? We don't know that she knows who he is because his name hasn't been said at that point. And then when I was reading it, I was just reading it, waiting to see where somebody actually mentions his name. Very weird. So yeah, whilst the storytelling in general was good, those things made it great for me. I wasn't very impressed. I found the artwork distracted too much from the rest of it for me. It was all rather tonal too. Didn't get a feel that they went from an English winter on a lovely train to the Riviera. I didn't feel that transition. It all looked the same to me. What did you think, Alan?
As you've been talking about it, and I'm thinking back to my reading of it, I wonder if some of the issues were around the translation rather than the source material. Because you're right, I had the same thing when Catherine Gray first meets Poirot. I got a couple of panels later on, and I'm like, hang on a minute, he didn't introduce himself. And I was the same thing. I was waiting for when somebody was actually going to say that this character was Poirot. I mean, it was obvious it was Poirot, but nobody within the world of the book actually said, this is Poirot, for quite a while. So I had the same thing with you. There's another place where there's a very large word balloon, but very little text in it. And then the next word balloon doesn't make sense, doesn't connect to the previous one. And I'm wondering if a bit of text was missed out when they pasted it up and the translation was missed or something. I do wonder if some of the issues are from the translation process. And like you said, maybe that wasn't edited as closely as it should have been. But I did like the clear, detailed artwork. I like the very noirish opening of it with the robbery in Paris. That felt very film noir type stuff. I like that. I thought there was some good storytelling techniques. He did some things that I think you can only do in comics. And I think overall he did a fairly good job of conveying the story. Though I'm not sure why he did the reveal at the end of the relationship between the Marquis and the jewel. What's the word I'm looking for?
Jeweler,
the jewel fence, the guy who sold the jewels. I don't know why he moved that from the end, sort of partway through the book to right at the beginning. I didn't think that was necessary. One thing I really did like, and I think this is something you can only do in comics, really, was when they did the repeat train ride towards the end. He had a railway line running across the top of each page with the stations, and if you look down, the name of that station sort of was vertically in line with the scene that took place at that particular station. I thought that was very clever. I liked that. I thought it was a good visual storytelling technique. But like we mentioned, I think there was a scene that had been missed, or some text had been skipped or missed, and the whole thing with Poirot not introducing himself. I think that was, I don't know, maybe it's in the translation. I may be either doing the translator a disservice, and maybe it wasn't. It was like that in the original French. I don't know. Generally, I thought the characters were well depicted in terms of the fact that we were all recognizable as individuals. But you're spot on. I did not like the fact that everybody had this large, high forehead, and the men all looked like brutes. Poirot, in particular, with his thick neck and bubbly features, he looked very brutish, which was an interesting stylistic choice with the characters. And as you said, maybe that's the way that this particular artist draws people. But I think that did distract it from it. So I don't think it was as good as the one for the Big Four, but I still think it was one of the better graphic novels out there in terms of storytelling and the visual techniques used in storytelling, but it definitely had its down moments as well.
Fair enough. I just found the artwork so distracting that I didn't even notice, like, the map you talked about.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
So that's also very interesting because I just didn't enjoy it at all.
We're all entitled to an opinion. That's part of the point of the podcast. So.
But you're wrong.
Well, there is that too, yes. So one adaptation we didn't listen to is the radio adaptation, but The Mystery of the Blue Train was adapted for radio by BBC Radio 4 with Maurice Denham as Poirot and was broadcast in 6 parts weekly between 1985 and 1986. And actually was the first of the adaptations of Poirot novels by the BBC Radio. Interesting that they picked that one as the first one. Which brings us on to the more regular adaptations on television, of course. The novel was adapted for television in 2006, a special episode of the series Agatha Christie's Poirot. It's actually season 10, episode 1. So we're getting into the period when they're doing like the 90-minute movie length type things. It was adapted by Guy Andrews and directed by Hetty MacDonald. And of course, starred David Suchet as Poirot. I don't know what to say about this. I'm just going to read my note. The note I wrote in the script was, any resemblance to the source material is completely coincidental. It's strangely muddled. I don't know. Once I realized we were getting a very different story, featuring the characters mentioned in the book, or at least people with the same name, because in some cases they had the same name, but they weren't the same character. When I realized basically that I had to put the book out of my mind, I tried to enjoy this as a standalone mystery on its own merits. But to be honest, it made no sense to me. It seemed to contradict itself. It was overloaded with unnecessary backstory, totally implausible connections, leaps of logic, or complete lack of logic in some cases. And Poirot just seemed to pull things out of thin air. At the end, just the reason for the murder was that these two people were psychotic killers. Where did that come from? I don't know. It was a waste of a very talented cast. I will say that most of the people played their parts pretty well. But I don't know. It was a waste of a good cast and a waste of our Sunday evening. I have no idea what that was. And I know you enjoyed it about as much as I did, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks. I never understand adaptations who take a perfectly good story and don't use it, and instead make something so incomprehensibly awful and boring. I was embarrassed to watch it sometimes, and I felt sorry for the actors in it. Because what did we watch? I don't understand what any of it was, to be honest. Catherine Grey was just reduced to being somebody that stood there in different outfits with a puzzled look on her or a comical look on her face. I didn't understand any of it. Where did Poirot get his information from? And you didn't see him sending any telegrams or doing any detecting. How are we supposed to know what the article said that was on the wall at Lady Tamplin's house? It was in French, and it wasn't shown long enough for my French reading skills to decipher it. Poirot was really cross-looking most of the time. Don't understand that. I mean, this is one of the later ones where they are a little bit more dour. And why did we have nuns? At what point did it matter who Ruth Kettering's mother was? Why was the dancer Maid Van Alden's mistress? And the denouement, well, what the heck was that? I mean, I just sat there, and it took me a while. Obviously, I've got a lot to say now, but it took me a while for a little bit to work out what on earth I was going to say, because it was a perfectly good story. It would have made a great episode had they used the actual book. They could have made it tense and funny and interesting. I think the only good thing they did out of it was they sent Catherine Grey off traveling rather than falling in love with Derek Kettering from a few glances and maybe two conversations. Why she ended up interested in two men she barely talked to in the book, I don't know. But at least they didn't do that here. Like you said, felt like it was a total waste of my time. And I don't often feel like that about these adaptations. There is one more coming that is well renowned to be awful.
Oh, thank you. I look forward to it.
But no, going in knowing that it doesn't really follow a lot of the book, I actually quite like it.
You're not talking about this one, you're talking about the one we haven't seen yet.
Yeah. Now we'll move on to favourite quotes. This is speaking about her first solo trip. I was going by myself. I should find out what kind of person I was, whether I had become entirely dependent on other people as I have feared. I could indulge my passion for seeing places, any place I wanted to see. I could change my mind at a moment's notice, just as I had done when I chose Baghdad instead of the West Indies. And later on she says, never again, I decided, will I put myself at anyone's mercy. And I think that last line is very telling. She's becoming her own person. She's moving out of the shadow of being a daughter and a wife to finding out who she actually is, I feel, with that sense, at this time.
So thanks for joining us for this episode of the Chronological Christie podcast. If you would like to leave a rating or a review on your favorite podcast platform, that would be great. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. If you'd like to discuss any aspect of this episode, you can message us on the Chronological Christie Instagram account, or actually leave feedback on podcast platform as well. Thank you for those folks who have made some comments. We got a couple of comments recently, so really appreciate that. A link for the Chronological Christie Instagram account will be in the show notes. or you can find us individually on social media. Jill, where can you be found?
I can be found on the Chronological Christie Instagram account or on TikTok, either under the Chronological Christie account or on my author TikTok under Gilly Kent. How about you, Alan?
And I can be found on most social media platforms just by searching for @Alan J. Porter or via my author's website at alanjporter.com. And if you want to keep up with our various writing projects, you can sign up for our free bi-weekly newsletter at alanjporter.substack.com.
The books either discussed or used for this podcast can be found on a dedicated Chronological Christie section of our online bookstore at bookshop.org. The link will be in the show notes. Please join us for our next episode when we will be hosting our next Q&A episode. And of course, our Patreon backers get a chance to submit their own questions. We look forward to you joining us.
The music used in this episode was extracted from I'm Somebody Somebody Now by the Joe Venuti Orchestra and is a public domain recording. The Chronological Christie podcast is a production of Megrin Entertainment, a division of 4J's Group, LLC.